I don't just want the facts of what happened on the day of, but I want to know, who are these people?
I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't hear. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear the thoughts build up until I can't hear. That my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. In a weird way, but also in a very real way, a single trial in America is like looking through a keyhole into the whole of America. That's what the Murdaugh case is. You cannot simply locate the murder of Paul and Maggie near some dog kennels one summer. Instead, listen to the man, listen to the husband, the father, the patriarch, Alex Murdaugh. Listen to his exact words. Because his first words, one-on-one with officers on the scene, are striking.
This is a long story. My son was in a boat wreck a few months back. I know that's what it is.
And of course, it is a long story, and of course, it did have to do with the boat incident. Because we know that the court-ordered mediation in the wrongful death lawsuit caused by Paul Murdaugh and regarding Mallory Beach, we know that that happened on June 4th, 2021. That was a Friday. That meant the case was going to trial. And the case going to trial meant all Alex's wheeling and dealing at work and wherever, extramurally, that giant shit stain was going to be found out. And how could he avoid that being found out? Well, what if he made another giant shit stain lickety split? It took 3 days for the criminal psychology gears in Murdaugh's mind to apparently change from their default settings of theft, fraud, and financial crimes to murder. And if he was going to murder Paul, he reasoned he was going to have to murder Maggie as well. Buster, he could handle. On June 7th, Maggie and Paul were summoned to Moselle, and Murdaugh then staged the crime. The interesting thing is, in theory, he could have killed both of them painlessly, but he wanted it to be shocking. He wanted it to be so shocking that people wouldn't know what to think. This was the first layer of psychological camouflage. Make it so savage that no one would ever imagine it could be him. And that's really the first insight. Before we get to the rest of this analysis, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. By the way, I've actually been to Moselle. I've been in that fabric of America, just trying to get a real sense, a real authentic sense of what happened in this particular case. If you're enjoying this episode, this analysis, please like, share, leave a comment. You can also hit the thanks button, and let's get started. So Alex also made simple mistakes. One of them was handling Paul's phone. When admitting this, he couldn't say why he did it, which reminds me of Oscar Pistorius doing the same thing with Reva's phone.
I think I tried to turn Paul over first. His cell phone popped out of his pocket. I started to try to do something with it, thinking maybe, but then I put it back down really quickly.
So let's check, let's assess how good you are as a true crime rocket scientist. Can you say now, after all is said and done, this is those who've really paid attention to this case, who watched the trial, who've watched all the documentaries, can you say now, after all is said and done, why Alex handled Paul's phone? Think about that. Please leave your answer in the comments. I think he was trying to delete crucial inculpatory evidence. Alex's biggest mistake, in my opinion, and this is number 2 on our list, was not being able to delete this recording on Paul's phone.
Hey, he's got a bird in his mouth.
Damn, Bubba.
It's a guinea.
This is a chicken.
Come here, Bubba.
Come here, Cash.
Come here, Bubba.
Cash. Quit.
Murdaugh claimed he didn't go to the family's kennels that night until he found his wife and son's bodies.
This recording actually occurred minutes before the crime, and it was Alex Murdaugh's version that he was nowhere near the kennels when the crime took place. Instead, he said he was sleeping for 25 to 30 minutes.
I was up at the house. I laid down, took a nap on the couch, probably, 25, 30 minutes.
In the body cam footage, you can hear one of the officers saying, "I don't think he put that phone back on his behind," meaning that Paul did that. And so this was critical evidence that had been recorded on that phone immediately prior to Paul's murder. And it was this evidence that was really going to implicate Alex and actually put him at the scene. Alex had gone to extraordinary efforts to concoct an alibi, for example, by driving to his mother, who was likely asleep anyway, and then returning. You may remember that he asked the housekeeper to say that he'd been there longer than he actually had. This was an extraordinary result for a lawyer who one would imagine was smart and must have considered all the scenarios, including how to stage the scene so that he could explain his way out of it. What he underestimated, apparently, was his son's proclivity for using his phone. And because Alex's story about not being anywhere near the kennels didn't jibe with Alex's distinctive voice on Paul's 58-second video, Alex had to try to control or undo that narrative as well in court.
Did you hear any other voices when you were on the phone with Paul about 8:40?
I did.
And what voices did you hear?
I heard Miss Maggie.
And who else did you hear?
And I thought it was Mr. Ellick that I heard.
Cell phone records show Paul took that video right after that call. Minutes later, he and his mother were dead.
Did you ever get that video?
I did not.
Police later showed Gibson that video from inside the kennel.
And what voices did you hear?
Paul's, Miss Maggie, Mr. Ellick.
And how sure are you now?
Positive.
100%?
That's correct.
Prosecutors playing that video for him again in court.
And that comes from ABC7 Chicago. One of the last comments left on that video is, "Who would have thought that Paul would end up solving his own murder?" And that is essentially what happened because of this failure to find and delete this video. And then as a result of this video being out there, Murdaugh then made the extraordinary decision to testify. And I think that's also something we can say in hindsight. Was that a good decision? How good was he on the stand? Did the jurors believe him? But on the other hand, you can sort of also see the legal aspect that he had to come up with some explanation. If he didn't testify, the writing was on the wall as well. And so what did he do on the stand? He insisted that he didn't shoot Paul and Maggie. And then he was forced to acknowledge that he had lied to investigators about where he was. When he testified on about the 23rd of February 2023, he said, "I don't think I was capable of reason, and I lied about being down there, and I'm so sorry that I did."
Mr. Griffin, I didn't shoot my wife or my son anytime. Ever.
Alec Murdaugh proclaiming his innocence, and after more than 20 months, admitting he lied about one key piece of evidence against him.
Mr. Murdaugh, is that you? On the kennel video at 8:44 p.m. on June 7th, the night Maggie and Paul were murdered.
It is.
Over and over, Murdaugh had told investigators he hadn't seen his family since dinner and was not at the dog kennels around the time of the murders. But that video, extracted from his son's phone, was recorded minutes before prosecutors believe the killings occurred. And many witnesses have testified it was Alec Murdaugh's voice on the recording. Murdaugh told the jury he had left the kennels and driven his golf cart to the main house on the property.
There's no way that I had high velocity blood spatter on me.
Just to be clear, were you anywhere in the vicinity when Paul and Maggie were shot?
I was nowhere near Paul and Maggie when they got shot.
You agree that the most important part of your testimony here today is explaining your lie for a year and a half that you were never down at those kennels at 8:44. Would you agree with that?
I think all of my testimony is important.
All Alec Murdaugh had to do was fool jurors like this one. This is the number 3 insight, that Alex was bargaining on his mother's housekeeper, for example, telling things the way he wanted her to tell them. But instead, she told the truth, and this juror and several others like her believed her. I think jurors like Gwen Jenneret believed the housekeeper over Alex. And it was because they were similar folk in a way and likely had more in common with one another. And besides, Murdaugh had admitted to lying to virtually everyone, clients, colleagues, friends, and family, when he was on the stand. This is also another big mistake, number 4 on our list, that Murdaugh seemed to think he was good at lying to and misleading clients and people like him, and that his influence would take care of the rest. The number 5 insight is that crimes can be proved and won with enough compelling circumstantial evidence. Circumstantial evidence doesn't mean it's not scientific. It's unfortunately true that a lot of people simply don't know this, and I think as a result, Murdaugh's attorney tried to use this strategy to dupe the jury. And that brings us to mistake number 6.
I submit to you what you have heard from the Attorney General as facts are not. There's no eyewitness. There's no camera. There's no fingerprints. There's no forensics tying him to the crime. None. He didn't do it.
One image in the Netflix docu-series that really stood out to me is a photo of Dick Harpootlian standing right next to President Biden. Now, it may be true that there wasn't much directly tying Murdaugh to the murders. For example, neither of the murder weapons were found. I don't think Alex Murdaugh's clothes were even found, the original clothing, I mean. But if the prosecution could set up an incredibly accurate timeline, which is kind of the circumstances, the context, and if the timestamp of Paul's Snapchat video could be stitched seamlessly into it, and if the jury believed they were hearing Alex's voice on it, then the prosecution didn't need to leap that hurdle of directly tying him. They could kind of weave Alex into the story, and he would need to be able to explain his movements minute to minute. Would he be able to do that? Because he was there, he had opportunity, had access, he had weapons. The tricky part was motive. Now that all is said and done, can you say what the motive was? Please write it, pause this video and write down what you think the motive was in the comments. That brings us to insight number 7, and that is that Alex was motivated more by a lust and a love for money. In other words, greed. His motive was greed than a lust for power. This isn't in the Netflix documentary or elsewhere in the media narrative. Because, or even what you heard in court. That's the TCRS, the True Crime Rocket Science assessment of the motive in this case. And it's astonishing how misunderstood it still is. The murders came at the end of a long season of greedy excess and were motivated by the need to preserve that way of life. I think if he cared so much for his family legacy, he wouldn't have committed the crimes he committed in the carefree way, in the constant way over a long period of time that he did. He surfed on his family's influence, much like Paul did. The error, which brings us to the number 8 on our list, is although Crichton Waters is 100% correct that the catalyst that led to Alex Murdaugh's unraveling was the boat case, and it was important to make that clear, and he did a brilliant job. He succeeded in doing that. Where I disagree is that Alex wasn't worried that the boat case might undermine the family legacy.
The boat case created possible criminal liability for Paul that threatened to undermine that family legacy that was so important to Alec.
I think if all it was that was motivating Alex was concern for the family legacy and his own place in it, Alex would have thrown Paul to the wolves, much as John Paul Getty did when his 16-year-old grandson was kidnapped. Or Alex would have tried to find a way to quickly and quietly settle the case, the boat case. I think the reason Alex couldn't quickly or quietly settle the case is because of his financial crimes going back many, many years. And he couldn't settle the case because of the financial crimes, because of the scale of his greed, and because he didn't have as much money as those suing him thought he ought to have. Besides that, Alex was a victim of karma. Personal injury law in South Carolina, and like I said, I've traveled through South Carolina, I've listened to the personal injury advertising, I've seen the billboards, I've heard the ads on the radio. I've and it really is knitted through the fabric of that society. Personal injury law. It's unreal. And so when Paul's actions led to the the death of Mallory Beach, it awakened a whole set of circumstances, including the personal injury tiger that was Mark Tinsley. Tinsley recognized the Beach case as a jackpot case, involving a really, really wealthy family, the scion of, the Murdaugh dynasty, legal scion. But it was that jackpot that he was trying to seize upon that was going to expose the giant shit stain hidden beneath the Murdaugh mythos. I also don't think Murdaugh would have killed his own family if family legacy meant as much to him as some people believe. Does that make sense? Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.
Were you living a wealthy lifestyle?
I just don't know what you mean by wealthy.